Can I start?
Yes, now it's recording.
Okay.
Okay.
Got it.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all my colleagues, all the participants from all over this globe. Good evening from New Zealand, Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. My name is Siham El Kafafi, and I am the Continental Director, Oceania. And today is our first webinar that we are hosting from New Zealand for GEN, the Global Education Network. It's a pleasure to be with you here tonight. And today we are going to have a very interesting topic to start with in order to introduce to you New Zealand. So we chose to a historical topic to talk about the indigenous tribal people of New Zealand. They are none other than the Maoris, and their constitutional arrangement. It is now marks almost 200 years anniversary since the signing of the proclamation or the Declaration of Independence Constitution that was signed in 1835. And this is what we call the Titiriti of Waitangi in Maori in 1840, or we call it in English the Treaty of Waitangi. So we are having, my dear, the independence of the United Tribes of New Zealand, a historical background and perspective. And I have also one of my dear friends, Andrew, who is going to introduce for us Catherine and her background. So I would leave it for Andrew, who is going to also be our moderator for this webinar. Thank you.
Kia everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I have the pleasure to introduce to you Catherine Hermonga, who is the GAN coordinator for New Zealand. Catherine has a diverse background, having trained and worked in a number of industries and professions, which span from design, planning, construction, to environmental science management, economics, education, in which she is a former lecturer at one of our beautiful universities of Waikato. Catherine holds a Master's of Management Studies degree, from which she graduated with a distinction, another Master's of Science Technology Honors degree. She also holds other qualifications in architectural drafting, organic horticulture, and of course, Maori arts. Catherine was a recipient of a Foundation for Research Science and Technology in New Zealand Fellowship in the years 1997 to 98. Catherine was also a recipient of various academic accolades. Over the last decade, Catherine has worked on constitution of Maori indigenous sovereignty issues, and she has been involved in the development of the Maori government, www.govt.maori.new.zealand, where she was Secretary of State until November 2021. She has also worked with the Te Wakaminenga Onga Hapu Onu Tereni, which means General Assembly of the Confederation of the United Tribes of New Zealand, and Te Whare Ariki Anunga, the upper house of paramount chiefs. Catherine is a descendant of a number of chiefs that signed the Declaration of Independence that Dr. El Kafafi has just talked about. This is the declaration which was signed in 1835, and it's called in Maori, Te Titiri, Teriti or Waitangi, which is the Treaty of Waitangi of 1935. It is the legal constitutional document of New Zealand. Now, I'll hand over to Catherine so that she takes us through the journey of knowing the history of New Zealand. Over to you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew and Siam. How do I get onto my shared screen?
At the bottom, there is,
Oh, there we go.
at the bottom
Oh,
of the screen, there is the green one sharing.
okay, so I want to get onto here. Okay. Yes, so greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our friends across the globe and colleagues.
Catherine, we cannot
Yeah.
see your screen.
Oh, can't you? Sorry.
No. Your PowerPoint has to be already up on your desktop, and then afterwards you go onto share screen and you locate it and find it and click twice on it. Then it will share with us.
Okay, hang on. Escape from here. Where are you? Share.
The bottom of the screen, there's
Can
a
you see
green
it now?
button. Yes, yes, yeah, it's coming.
Sorry.
Yep, yeah, we can see it.
Okay. How do I get onto? Sorry about this.
It's okay. No worries.
I'm not very technical. Anyway, thank you very much, Andrew and Sam, for introducing me. I will be talking about the independence of the United Tribes of New Zealand, giving a historical perspective. As Andrew mentioned, I've had quite a varied background. I ended up working in economics about 20 years ago in the field of sustainable economic development and natural resource economics. And anyway, I just felt like there's something missing with I guess our society and how these sustainable economic plans were sort of like rolling out for our people. And a lot of it has been the result of a lot of suppressed history. I'd gone through an education system where they basically denied a lot of our history, and I'm not sure why, but it got me to looking for answers for what was happening. And in the end, I sort of like led onto a path of discovery and to find out what was the true history of our people and our country. And so I'll give a little bit of a background to our history and our people, and a little bit about the Declaration of Independence and Te Treaty of Waitangi and what's happening today. There are two documents. The Declaration of Independence is actually separate from Te Treaty of Waitangi. The Declaration is the first founding document of this country. So a little background, the United Tribes of New Zealand is constitutionally recognised in our Declaration of Independence and our Protectorate Treaty, Te Treaty of Waitangi, 1840. So it's the native Maori people that have the constitution, but the current New Zealand government does not have a constitution. And which sort of I asked, well, how come we've got a government in place that doesn't have a constitution, yet we have the tribes, the United Tribes having a constitution. And at the moment, we're going through a lot of massive upheaval in the globe and in New Zealand, socially and economically. And people are starting to awaken to alternative systems, and our people are rediscovering our history, and are hopeful that our constitution or could give hope in uncertain times. So we have what we call a native jurisdiction, tino rangatiratanga, which is our native jurisdiction, and we have Te Waka Meninga o Ngā Hapu Unu Tirini, and in English that's the United Tribes of New Zealand, which is our General Assembly that meet at Waitangi to make decisions. But over the last century or so, it has been in recess. And basically our laws are based around our tikanga, our customs, which are an exact expression of natural law. The history of the New Zealand colony, how did our country end up being called New Zealand is a bit of a mystery, but the New Zealand colony was first stationed. It was part of the East India Company stationed in Taiwan. I discovered that there was a little bit of history about the colony of New Zealand at Yale University, and they had actually set up a fort in Taiwan called the Fort of New Zealand. This colony moved south to the Spice Islands, and then it sort of like disappeared. What is a colony? Okay, a colony is a small portion of a foreign population, which then, I guess, colonizes a host population. Over time, this colony has actually expanded to basically almost take over the host. Okay. Sorry. Up until recently, I didn't actually know, because of the history being suppressed in this country, that there were three forms of government. We had a native government, we had the imperial government, which was the British government, and then we had also the government of New Zealand, which is actually an offshoot of the New Zealand Company, which was an immigration company that came to our country around the time of the signing of the treaty. There was a lot of confusion when Prince William came to our country to open up the Supreme Court, and he discovered that the flag that was recognised by his ancestors was not the same flag or seal as that was actually being presented by the New Zealand government. So that sort of like, you know, caused a lot of, how would you explain it? Questions, I guess. And then during the treaty settlement process, there had been a lot of statements coming out by different politicians to basically tell non-Maori New Zealanders, which are the Pākehā, that our laws are separate, because what's happened is under colonisation, we've had to homogenise under the majority population, which are non-Maori, and they don't actually, a lot of them actually don't understand that we actually have a right to self-determine our own lives and have our own laws. The Maori population is only about 15% at the moment, but in the beginning it was almost like 100% of the population was Maori. And over the years, there has been basically a dumbing down of our society to actually keep us in a suppressed state. To actually understand our treaty relationship and jurisdiction, I drew this Venn diagram. Well, it's sort of like a Venn diagram, but we have the hapu or ngā hapu or Nutini, which is the tribes, and this is our flag here. And we have a treaty relationship with Her Majesty the Queen of England, that's her flag there. And then within her sphere, there is the Governor General and the New Zealand government. So that's sort of the relationship that we have, if you can understand it. The New Zealand government was actually a private company, which was the New Zealand company, which has taken the position of government. And they try to overstep into our jurisdiction all the time and form institutions like companies and trust boards and councils to represent Maori, but are in this jurisdiction over here. So Maori Indigenous people, okay. There are two origins of the Maori people. There are the people that we call the tangata whenua, or the people that were here for time immemorial, and then we have the other tribes that have come in through various forms of migration and colonisation over the centuries. Our people were Pacific people. There has been some genealogical linkages to Asia and Africa, and also South America and other islands in the Pacific. As I said before, they represent about 15% of the current population, and their native language is Te Reo Māori. So getting on to our worldview and how we see things. I think these are just some scenes of how our people used to live. They were seafaring people. They would travel between the islands, the Pacific Islands, and trade over the centuries. They would go back and forwards depending on the season. but we believed that we descend from the gods. Okay, our gods represent different parts of the environment. So in our genealogies, we can trace our ancestry back to the Earth Mother, the Sky Father, and the Supreme Creator, Iho. Okay, and there's also other different parts, different other gods that represent different parts of the environment, such as Tāne Mahuta, who represents the forests, Tangaro, who represents the seas, Ruamoko, who represents the god of earthquakes, etc., etc. So our customary laws were based around keeping balance in nature. Okay, so it's based around natural law and natural jurisdictions of those particular gods. During first contact, we first started having European contact about 400 years ago. We had some Portuguese and Spanish come through, and then we had Abel Tasman, who was a Dutch explorer with the Dutch East India Company, but he didn't stay that long. And then we had Captain Cook, who was a British explorer, and he was sent out by the monarchy of England to actually form diplomatic relations with friendly natives in different lands. Later on, we had the Church Missionary Society come in to our country, and they established different missionary stations around the place, in particular the North Island. Okay, and so we had Samuel Marsden, who was instrumental in teaching a lot of our people about Christianity, and Kendall as well. Kendall had actually taken some of our chiefs to England to meet the King of England at the time, King George III, Hongi Hika, and Waikato. They went to Cambridge University and developed the first written dictionary of Te Reo Māori language there. Also previous, that was in 1820. And just before that, we actually did a lot of trading between the British colony in Australia, which was a penal colony at that time, and so a lot of our people would go over there to trade. Samuel Marsden had also set up a missionary station in Sydney, and also a school, and a lot of children, Māori children, were actually sent to Sydney to be educated by Samuel Marsden. And the place in Sydney is called Rangiho, or Parramatta, where that particular missionary station was created. Not long after that, we had more and more people come to New Zealand. a lot more whalers and sailors were coming through, and they didn't really have really good intentions, a lot of them. They didn't understand our laws, and what happened was that the Governor General of New South Wales put out what they call the Pacific Protection Order over Pacific Island people. So any Pacific Islanders, which also included Maori, travelling on any of the ships were protected at any of the British ports around the world. And that was, at that particular time, the British had the greatest naval might in the world, but they had actually formed a good relationship with Maori back in the early 1800s. And so a number of the chiefs had negotiated this Pacific Protection Order with the British. In 1806, there was an anthropologist that came to New Zealand. His name was Savage, and he studied the systems of governance in our country, and he came to the conclusion that the way that we governed at that particular time was that we had a chief on the coast and a chief inland, and they basically ruled in those particular areas, and they managed the resources and the people in those areas. So we had the Church Missionary Society in 1840 came. We had the diplomatic missions that went overseas by Hongi Hika, Waikato and other chiefs. But later on we had an attack by a French ship that came through called the Marion, and a lot of our people died. And so in retaliation, there was an attack by one of our tribes on another ship coming through our waters. And then later on, some of the chiefs up north, because the north of our country were basically the place where a lot of the sailors and whalers would come through and stay. And so these northern chiefs decided that they would write a letter. They were concerned about a lot of these people coming through and being quite unruly, and decided to write a letter to King William IV to ask for protection from the British. And that's mainly because they had the biggest naval might in the world at the time. Plus, under English common law, they do have, they had the best system when it came to the protection of human rights and Indigenous rights. Mainly because if you look at English history, they too were once tribal people, and they were colonised as well over the last 1,000 years, or 2,000 years, I should say. And so we had this letter that was sent to King William asking for protection. And then later on, he had actually sent a flag for our ships to use and us to use, because what was happening when our people were going out trading in different countries, they were being detained and arrested, and their boats being taken off them. And so part of the protectorate protection was that we use the English flag, or the English naval flag, which is similar to our He Whakaputanga flag, and it has the St. George's Cross on it. But we decided to change the flag a little bit, and so we've got the stars in the top left-hand quadrant. Well, our chiefs decided that they'd change it so it would be more representative of us, and so we have these stars in these quadrants instead of the anchors that the British Royal Navy have. And those stars represent our maramataka, our calendar, and also our link to the natural environment. The flag was gazetted on the 17th of August in 1835, and so this is our flag here. This one here. You might also see this flag here, but it is not our sovereign flag. Also in 1835, on the 28th of October, our chiefs, well, some of the chiefs had signed the Declaration of Independence. Some say it's a proclamation of independence because we were already sovereign. Okay. The framework of the declaration consists of 4 articles. So it's written in Te Reo Māori in our native language, but in the first article, it talks about the establishment of the General Assembly or Congress of the United Tribes, or Te Waka Meaninga o Ngā Hapu, or Nutirini. Okay, we use Nutirini because over the centuries, a lot of the maps had named our country New Zealand. A lot of the European maps named our country as New Zealand, so we were called New Zealanders around the globe as a result. But the traditional names of our country are, well, some say Aotearoa, but Aotearoa only represents the North Island, and also Te Ika Maui, which also represents the North Island, but I go by the name Hawaii Toto, which has been in use for over 2,000 years in our country. But we use this Declaration of Independence. We use Nutirini in this Declaration of Independence. Under Article 2, it states that the sovereignty lies with the assembled Congress of Ngā Hapu, or Nutirini, or the United Tribes, and that all laws and functions of government need to have the authority of this particular Congress. In Article 3, it talks about the framing of laws, peace and good order, the rights to justice, and the regulation of trade. And in Article 4, it's because this declaration was signed mainly by the Northland chiefs, they decided to invite the Southern tribes to join in with the Congress, and also to acknowledge King William IV of England for recognising our flag and being the steward and protector of our infant state. In the Halsbury Journal, it talks about the supremacy of the New Zealand Parliament, and basically since however every parliament is supreme, one parliament cannot derogate the powers of a subsequent parliament. So as a result, the New Zealand Parliament cannot derogate from the supremacy of England, and England cannot derogate from the sovereign supremacy of the Maori nation assembled in Parliament at Waitangi. When we signed, like the Hifakaputanga is our founding document, but we have Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed 5 years later. And that is our protectorate treaty that we had signed with the British monarch, Queen Victoria. So it had over 500 chiefs sign this particular document, and there were 9 sheets to this particular document. It travelled around the country, and so as a result, yeah, there were 9 sheets that went out and were signed. The framework of the treaty, Article 1 defines. It was also written in Te Reo. There was an English version, but it wasn't an exact translation, and so there has been disputes over the years over its translation, but this is sort of like a rough idea about what it means. So in Article 1, it identifies the parties in the treaty and recognises Her Majesty the Queen of England to have a government over her own people that came into our country. And then Article 2 recognises the rights of the chiefs and the tribes and their descendants to their independence, to self-determine via Tino Rangatiratanga, our Declaration of Independence over our estates and lives. Article 3 recognises the right of protection for Maori as having the same rights as British subjects. So we can choose to go under the protection of the British monarchy as well. So it brings into play the Magna Carta, English common law, and the English Bill of Rights. And basically, you know, the reasons why our ancestors signed this was because under English common law, they actually, you know, protected Indigenous rights and human rights. Some may differ on that, but and I can understand that because there has been other people that haven't lived up to you know, different agreements or different laws. And then we've had also infiltration by corporations that have pretended to be governments. In 1846, there was a royal letters patent issued, and in that letters patent, they recognised another sort of like recognition of our Indigenous rights and our rights to our territories and our jurisdiction. Again, also in the New Zealand Constitution Act of 1852, they basically recognised our rights to self-government. And also in the Native Territorial Rights Act of 1858. Okay. In 1862, like, you know, because I didn't know that we actually had our own governments for most of my life, and a lot of people in this country didn't even know either. But I discovered, just reading through old legislation, imperial laws from the British, that they recognised our native government and their laws. And and also the government of New Zealand, which is actually the New Zealand company, and also the imperial government, which is the British government. Okay. This is our flag, okay, and somehow, like I wasn't brought up with this flag growing up. I was brought up with the, the blue flag with the Southern Cross stars on it, and but after doing some more research, I sort of like discovered, well, we had this whole history of our people using this flag, and we had our anthem created for this flag. And our sports teams, our All Blacks, actually use this flag. And in old harbour master records, they recognised our flag in old shipping records. These are records from Australia. So what happened later on was, because we had a lot of immigrants coming in with the New Zealand company, the New Zealand company was set up by ex-convicts, the Wakefield brothers, and they decided that they could make a lot of money by selling people a dream of, having a new life in our country, in New Zealand, and being able to like buy land for cheap and come here and start a new life. But they were selling land to these people that hadn't actually been alienated properly. And as a result, we had thousands of people just turning up on our doorsteps, expecting land to live on. And it caused a lot of pressure. And then eventually a war, or several wars, around our country. And so a lot of our land was taken by gunpoint, by the militias that were created by the settlers. And they used the excuse of the Maori King movement, political movement. The Maori King was established, their movement was established 18 years after the Treaty of Waitangi was signed. It's an unconstitutional king. And however, the particular chief that ended up being the Maori King, he had actually signed He Whakaputanga, our Declaration of Independence. But a monarchy or a king is quite different to how our constitution was set up, which is basically a republic. And we had at that time British, the Queen's representatives living in this country, like the Governor General, and the Governor General of that time regarded the Maori King political movement as a foreign force, and that sort of helped to ignite the land wars. But what happened what happened later on after the land wars, there was a lot of land confiscation that took place, with our tribe, we had over 3 million acres taken off us in the Waikato. Also what happened, our people became quite disempowered. They had to move off their lands, become urbanized, and ended up being in servitude to the industrialists that moved into our country. And later on, even though we had our own native government, it didn't actually sort of really had much power. And what happened was this particular Maori king, well, one of the Maori kings, ended up becoming an MP in the New Zealand company government, which was established down in Wellington. And so the so-called enemy of the state, which was the Maori king, joined forces with the New Zealand company, which was part of the colony. And then in 1907, that colony became a dominion. And a year later, they started implementing laws to alienate even more land off our people. So this is the Gazette notice about the formation of the colony of New Zealand being formed into a dominion. And this was just before World War I. And our people were convinced to go to war to help fight with the British because we were allies with the treaty. And so our people fought in World War, well, we fought in the Boer War, which was in South Africa. And then we fought in World War I and also in World War II. And the native contingents, they basically had an identity around our Declaration of Independence, or the our Wakaputanga, our Wakaminenga, and it was called the 28th Maori Battalion. Okay. Later on, later on after the wars, when they came back, they found that a lot of their land was, the remaining land was taken for soldier settlements. Even though they had fought in the war and were soldiers themselves, their lands were taken over and given to non-Maori soldiers. For dairy farms and whatever else. So over the next 50 years or so, we had quite a lot of deprivation amongst our people, forced into the cities, but we were urbanised, stuck on little reservations, and it caused a lot of problems in our society and a lot of backlash from our people. And so what happened, there was the development of a treaty settlement process, and the New Zealand government at that time created this Act of Parliament, which was the Treaty of Waitangi Act of 1975, which established the Waitangi Tribunal. There was an Office of Treaty Settlement, and then later on, these two organisations were taken over by another organisation called Te Ara Whiti, which is under the under the New Zealand government. In the treaty settlement process, it was quite non-transparent, and because you basically had the criminals being the judge and jury, there was no real independence in the decision making. And what happened was tribes that were affected by colonisation, by different injustices, they were captured by trust boards, which were under the New Zealand government. And these trust boards, their interests diverged from the people they represented. In the settlements, less than 1% of all the resources were returned. It created a system, a two-class system within Maori society, and it focused on ceding sovereignty and the termination of our treaty rights, and also resulted in the corporatisation of our tribe. So we ended up in a system of corporate rule. So basically we had, being trialled in a subordinate jurisdiction that lacks transparency and independence. And it wasn't a system of justice. Like we had war crimes committed against us. And so really it wasn't really, any satisfaction for our people. And it also created a system, a black market system over our natural resources, and resulted in basically, the social engineering of our tribes, because originally we were tribal people, we were kinship people, and then we had these corporations and trust boards running everything. So there has been a huge rejection by our people of the social re-engineering, and now our people are starting to talk about our constitution after rediscovering our history. So over the last few years, I've been involved in the Wakaminenga, o ngā hapu Nitirini, and helping to capacity build with our people. We developed with the people that have been, we only really worked with the people that were aware and awake, because our people have been so colonised by the system that they don't actually understand that we had our own constitution, and that we have our own rights to our own laws and our own justice system, and our own rights to be ourselves. And another reason why I ended up in this position was we had some major environmental and social issues going on in our country, and the only way that we could deal with it was on a constitutional level. And so we developed a number of proclamations to give notice to the New Zealand government and also Her Majesty the Queen about the different injustices that were going on that were impacting our people. So getting back to the Declaration of Independence, basically the New Zealand courts do not have jurisdiction over our Declaration of Independence or our people that operate under that jurisdiction. At the moment, we're trying to revive our tribal economies by colonisation, and we need to, because less than 1% of the gross domestic product of New Zealand actually go to Maori, despite the fact that we are 15% of the population. And we need to have access to our natural resources for food, medicine, and just to live. And also, we want to have the freedom from oppression, because we have, under the New Zealand system, a lot of oppression within different organisations and institutions against our people. And also the freedom of travel, like our people tend to be arrested a lot more often in their own country, or even in their own tribal territories, than any other people. So we just like to have those rights respected. In conclusion, our people are at various stages of decolonisation. There are some people that are awake to our history and our constitution and our rights, and some that just still have the blinkers on. But they are waking up. They are waking up to the fact that we have a de facto government system in our country, because we've got a private corporation running the country, and it doesn't work for us. Okay. It's not the British government, because we went through a system of state capture when you know, the New Zealand Company became a dominion of New Zealand, or the colony of New Zealand became a dominion. And there has been a reawakening to our constitution. And yeah, so especially since COVID as well, where there had been a lot of our human rights abused with the COVID lockdowns, being forced to vaccinate when people didn't want to vaccinate. And so there has, you know, a lot of non-Maori New Zealanders have woken up to the fact that we have a constitution, and you know, and you know, wanting to join us, basically. And there has been some work done by academics in our country about our constitutional history, but they're talking about constitutional transformation. It's been done by the Mātaki Mai group, which is a group of Auckland, tend to be Auckland academics, Māori academics. But the sort of like looking at wanting to rewrite our constitution, and we don't want to rewrite our constitution. So we need to look at how can we integrate others that have come into our country into our society. So that's basically my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine, for giving us a run through the history of New Zealand, the history of the native people, where they come from, how they became captured in a system of colonization, how they navigated the presence of the natives and the colonizers, the discussions that proceeded, the process of decolonization, where it is now, and where the Maori people, as the natives, want to see themselves being in the future. Thank you very much for the enlightened presentation.
Thank you.
I believe, as an immigrant myself, I've become much, much wiser. I have a history which is almost the same as yours, but being in New Zealand, this makes me aware of where we are as a people, living with a 15% population of the original people of the country. Thank you very much for giving us this presentation. I hope everyone has benefited from this presentation and you walk away wiser. I'll now hand us back to Siham to close us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.
Thanks a lot, Andrew, and thanks for a wonderful presentation, Catherine.
Thank you.
There is somebody who has been raising his hand for quite a while. So before we end, I will leave my comments until we take the question from Tamirat. You've been raising your hand. Would you like to ask a question? Sir, I can see your hand. You don't want to ask a question?
Yes.
No?
Yes, no question.
No, your hand is up. When the hand is up on Zoom, it means you want to ask a question. Okay, anyway. Can you kindly put your hand down then? Your hand is up. It means you need to ask a question. Oh, he doesn't know. Anyway. Catherine, on behalf of everybody, you have been busy giving your presentation. And I would like to, can you kindly mute yourself? Can you kindly mute yourself? Okay. Catherine, while you were giving your presentation, I have been monitoring the chat, and you have received a wonderful feedback from the participants. As you can see, we have about 36 participants tonight supporting our first Oceania webinar. I would like to thank them all and thank them for their wonderful feedback and support to us, and especially to you. Thank you for taking the time and going through this wonderful history of New Zealand and for its indigenous Maori people, to enlighten people and to share about our history with them. Thank you very much, and thanks for all participants. And I wish you all either a good morning, a good afternoon, or for us, a good evening. Thank you.